My name is Ute Collier. I'm the head of policy and renewable energy markets at the International Renewable Energy Agency. In this session this afternoon, this evening, we're going to discuss green hydrogen policy making. Now, as quite a few of you may have seen here at IRENA, we produced our World Energy Transitions Outlook last week. And I mean, it won't be surprising to anyone, it's extremely challenging to achieve 1.5 degree target by 2050. And in our Transitions Outlook, we looked at what that means for various energy carriers, and green hydrogen is one carrier we will need a significant contribution from by 2050. And in fact, our modeling suggests something like 7% of final energy consumption from basically nothing, because at the moment, the contribution of green hydrogen is negligible. There are lots of projects around, there is lots of interest from policymakers. And I mean, I think, Emanuele, you'll tell us in a moment, there was at least one other green hydrogen session at the Vienna Energy Forum earlier on. We see green hydrogen sessions have so many online events. So it's clearly a bit of the theme of the moment. Now, we've gathered a panel of people to help us navigate the green hydrogen challenge from a policy perspective. And I'll introduce the panel a little later on. But what we will do is we'll kick off with a scene-setting presentation from Emanuele, who's been working on green hydrogen for some time, and we have produced a number of different reports, and he's going to tell us sort of the highlights from that work. And then we will pass on to the panel discussion, where I will put a number of questions to our panelists, but of course we're also encouraging contributions from the audience. So you can obviously put your questions in the chat. So I hope to get some participation from everyone later on. But I'll pass over to Emanuele, who works with me in IRENA.
Thank you, Ute. And ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to be here to present today on the topic of green hydrogen. Now, as you know, and as Ute said, this is the topic of the hour, and IRENA did this role by producing reports, analysis on the cost, the barriers, and the policies that green hydrogen for green hydrogen. And 2 hours ago, we had a very interesting session by UNIDO about green hydrogen for industry. And tomorrow, you will, if you will join the Vienna Energy Forum, the New Energy Coalition will present a session about green hydrogen as a bridge between Europe and the UNIDO countries. Today, I'm going to present some of the findings of the Guides to Policymaking for Green Hydrogen of IRENA to set up the scene for the discussion. And as Ute said, green hydrogen is relevant because all the models showed that hydrogen is necessary to achieve 1.5 degrees. Accordingly to the WITO, hydrogen is set to provide 10% of the needed emission reduction. And to clarify, this means that we will need 400 megatons of green hydrogen from the negligible amount of today, and 5 terawatt of electrolysers. So, and this is 20,000 times today installed capacity. And green hydrogen is, of course, needed because it's a solution to reach those areas that cannot be easily electrified. But green hydrogen face a number of barriers. Some of them are easily identifiable because they share similarities with the same barriers experienced by the energy transition technologies at their inception. And chief among them is the high cost of green hydrogen and green products like green steel, green ammonia, and so on. We don't have a real demand for green products today, not an infrastructure, and of course not real capacity to produce green hydrogen. And these together create a chicken or egg problem, meaning that the lack of demand due to high cost leads to no supply, which keeps the cost high because we cannot achieve the economy of scale. The private sector first movers are solving this issue by integrating green hydrogen in existing processes or creating the so-called hydrogen valleys. And for policymakers, the choice then is between supply-side policy, so supporting electrolysis, and demand-side measures, so making the industry becoming greener by supporting them or forcing their hand. And we are seeing this already with countries positioning themselves towards supply or towards demand. And usually they do that by setting up a national hydrogen strategy. National hydrogen strategies are another thing that has become a fashion of the recent years. And we have seen them all across the world. From 2018, more than 20 countries had some kind of documents setting up their scene for green hydrogen, for hydrogen in general, in Europe, Latin America, Asia, and as we speak now, more and more are being drafted, again, all around the world in all the 5 continents. And one feature of these national strategies are the capacity targets. In particular, the European one had a 40 gigawatt plus 40 gigawatt in neighboring countries that has been complemented by the national hydrogen strategies of the member states by 2030. In addition, Chile is another country with a very ambitious target of 25 gigawatt by the end of the decade. So together, these make 105 gigawatt by 2030, which is 2% of what we need by 2050. Indeed, we should remember that targets are not a cap, but they are a floor. They should be surpassed when possible, and they should be seen as something to achieve as soon as possible, of course, hand in hand with more rapid renewable energy expansion. Because once electrolyzers are built, we must ensure that electricity used is renewable and affordable. Electricity could come from full on-site production, from the power grid, or from an hybrid solution. And in particular, electricity from the power grid can make hydrogen production cost-effective because of the availability, full load availability of the power grid. However, in this case, there is the problem that electrolysis is an industrial energy-intensive process for which electricity prices can be as high as $200 per megawatt hour. But here, taxes and fees can represent a significant share of this price. For example, an electrolyzer in Germany, if exempted from all taxes, could produce hydrogen at the cost of $2.5 per kilogram. But when all taxes and fees are added, the cost climbs up to $7 per kilogram. So it does not come as a surprise that Germany is going to exempt electrolyzers from both the electricity tax and the renewable surcharge. And this is a first example of a policy that can be enacted to support green hydrogen. Another one is actually one of the oldest tricks in the books for the energy transition, meaning green gas premium, feed-in premium, and auctions. Now, auctions, feed-in tariffs, covering the total cost of green hydrogen cost that can reach now $6 per kilogram, will not be that high or not higher than the feed-in tariffs and premium for solar PV in the past. As you can see in this graph, the cost for green hydrogen will be around $180 per megawatt hour. And this is below the average auction result for solar PV up to 2012. And as you can see in this figure, the cost of solar PV decreased, as you know it very well. And a similar cost decline is actually possible also for green hydrogen, accordingly to IRENA projection, which foresee by 2030 are decreased down to below $2 per kilogram. So this is another option that policymakers have to support green hydrogen. However, demand for green hydrogen, as I said, for now is only on paper. and few players are actually looking to use green hydrogen already. But most of the industry is not able or wants to use it or is able to afford it. So policymakers have some option to translate this demand into a real one. And for local demand, gas mix target and virtual blending could be an option. Policymaker could set a quota for green gas desired that could be reached by exchanging certificates, like it happened with the green certificate scheme all around the world. Or more action could be setting a gas target, imposing, mandating a certain amount of green hydrogen being used by the current gray hydrogen users. More action to kickstart demand for green hydrogen will be presented in another ARENA report that will be published this fall. However, it's interesting to see that while a local demand is not that high, lots of countries are actually engaging among each other to kickstart an international trading. And international trading, as you can see, is being seen in strategies. These are represented by the blue lines, but also by one-to-one memorandum of understanding between countries, here represented by the red line. And actually, some of these policies, some of these actions are being translated into real move or real trade of hydrogen, where Japan is the trailblazing country, as you can see by the purple lines. So after 2030, it's possible that green hydrogen will become an international experience. And in order to do that, the role of policymakers will become the one to guarantee that this hydrogen that has been traded will be sustainable and comparable among the various routes. And then for doing this, a guarantees of origin is necessary to avoid the unfair competition of unsustainable solutions. So now I presented very quickly some of the options policymakers have, and they are not absolutely all. ARENA, as I said, I've produced some reports on the topic, and for now we have already gathered among something like 20 policies plus policy pillars that are likely to shape the hydrogen sector for the future. With this, I conclude. I hope that I've been clear and that.
Great, thank you.
So, please.
Does that work? I think I lost something there from you. I don't know whether that was my connection or yours. Anyway, thank you, Emanuele. And of course, I encourage everyone in the audience to look at the hydrogen reports, which you can find on the ARENA website, of course. Okay, so we'll now move over to the panel discussion. So what we've decided to do, we've invited two policymakers and we've got two representatives from industry to discuss these challenges. So we have Ruud Kempner from the European Commission. Then we have Felipe Verástegui from Chile, from the ministry. Then from industry, Paula Brunetto from Enel Green Power, and Elvira Lopez Prados from Acciona. Now, I've got a set of questions, and I'll sort of go around the room with my questions. So when I ask you guys, maybe you just quickly want to introduce your role as well, rather than me reading off a very, reading off the biography, which I know sometimes people do that in conferences and you think, oh my God, 5 minutes of biography, we can find that elsewhere. So if you just quickly introduce what your main role is. So we are going to start with Elvira. Elvira, so you've of course been working with us at ARENA. We have the ARENA Coalition for Action, which is kind of our multi-stakeholder platform. And one of the things they've been working on is on green hydrogen, on practical insights for decarbonizing end-use sectors, and Elvira has been involved in that. So could you please share with the audience the key messages from this publication, especially with a focus on the main barriers and insights provided by first movers in the green hydrogen area? We're all on mute, right? Elvira, are you still on mute? You should be able to click at there's a microphone just below the panel of videos. Nope. Is there someone, is there someone who can help us on the technical front? Okay, we'll come back. No, I thought someone would be helping. Okay, we'll come back to Elvira. So instead, I'll go to the next person. Ruth, let's talk a bit about the European Commission and the European hydrogen strategy. I mean, Emanuele has already shown it on the slide, 40 gigawatt of electrolyzers by 2030, which is incredibly ambitious. But at the same time, the EU and its member states see themselves as large consumers. And that means eventually they would become importers of green hydrogen. So what is the formula to solve that chicken and egg problem Emanuele was talking about? Is it about a market-driven approach to stimulate demand, or will we need specific policies, especially to support electrolyzers? And what action is the Commission taking to transform this vision, this ambition into reality? So if you could give us some of your insights there, please.
Thank you very much, Ute, and thank you very much for the list of questions. I've written them down. Indeed, I work for the Directorate General for Energy at the European Commission. So for those, I see a lot of people not from Europe. It essentially means that it's kind of a Ministry of Energy, but then for all EU member states. And what we're doing, indeed, in July last year, is that we published a hydrogen strategy. But there I immediately want to give my first thought, and that is that we didn't produce a hydrogen strategy in isolation, but we combined it with a strategy on energy system integration, where we essentially said that to decarbonize a full energy system, which we need to do in order to achieve our carbon neutrality targets for 2050, we have a range of options. These include energy efficiency, more circular use of energy, direct electrification through renewables, as well as renewable fuels, as well as low carbon fuels. And in this third segment, indeed, we've highlighted hydrogen as one of the key application areas to decarbonize these hard to decarbonize applications in industry and transport, but also because we see a complementary role between the production of renewable hydrogen and a renewable-based electricity system where we're rapidly heading towards, because almost all of the additional power generation happening in Europe is from renewable power. So what did we do in this hydrogen strategy? Actually, like the report that Irina published, we looked at 5 policy areas where we thought action is needed. Indeed, one of the key, of course, highlights is our target of 40 gigawatts of renewable hydrogen electrolyzers by 2030. July 2020, that sounded very ambitious, but actually last month, the European Hydrogen Alliance, which are essentially the whole stakeholder group in Europe, put forward the results of their project collection exercise, where they said they already have 60 gigawatts of electrolyzers as plans, not of course as projects, but at least as plans available. So you see indeed that this market is rapidly evolving. So indeed, this was one of the elements, putting forward the target. And we see actually national member states in the EU corresponding to that with setting up their own national hydrogen strategies. And actually quite a number of them will be coming out before the end of the year, and which could be added to the list which you already showed before. A second element, indeed, what we also mentioned, is that you need not only production, but you also need to have demand. And here, indeed, we're looking at creating demand for renewable hydrogen and hard to decarbonize sectors like the industry. Hydrogen, for example, as feedstock, replacing the fossil-based hydrogen which Europe is producing today, or for very heavy duty and long distance transport applications. So indeed, that's the second pillar of the policy making which we're doing at the moment. A third pillar is infrastructure and markets. Europe has at the moment a European, trans-European network for both electricity and for gas. Now, a lot of this cross-border infrastructure, which has been developed, is also supported and regulated from a European perspective. And here we put on table at the end of last year a new proposal to start financing cross-border hydrogen infrastructure. So this would be hydrogen infrastructure, which is dedicated to the use of hydrogen, either via new hydrogen-based pipelines or by repurposing pipelines which are currently used for natural gas, since the consumption of natural gas will be declining over time as we move into carbon neutrality. So this is another pillar which we're looking at. And actually in July, within a week's time, we will also put forward proposals which look more on the transport infrastructure needed to enable the use of hydrogen for these hard to decarbonize applications in transport sector. Associated with that are also rules about markets, because like Ute mentioned before, we don't have any renewable hydrogen today. We also don't have, we have we have hydrogen pipelines today in Europe, already 1,500 kilometers, but these are privately owned. So the question there is, if we're moving indeed to scale up the use of renewable hydrogen, how can we ensure that both the production side, whether that's within Europe or it's being imported via a port in Europe, can reach those end consumers which need it? And what is the ownership models associated with that? So it's another pillar which we're looking at. Now, the fourth pillar, which we've mentioned before as well, is research and innovation. The biggest electrolyser currently in operation in Europe is 10 megawatt. We will have soon a 20 megawatt, which will be in operation. But like we said, we need gigascale electrolysers. Now, we already put out a call last year for 100 megawatt electrolysers, and we will be announcing those projects very, very shortly, as well as a new innovation fund, which we've created based on the money which we essentially received by the European emissions trading scheme. And again, there we're looking at large-scale demonstration projects for upscaling the technology. Now, electrolyzer is not the only part. We're really looking here at kind of a full supply chain. So that also means new technologies in terms of transporting hydrogen, storing hydrogen, dispatching hydrogen, and of course, new technologies needed to use hydrogen, for example, hydrogen-based airplanes. Now, the other element which we looked at, and that's also very important, and that's actually why we did the hydrogen strategy last year, is funding. We know that the renewable hydrogen today is more costly than fossil-based hydrogen. So we're looking at different policy options to indeed make that gap smaller. And of course, with making that gap smaller today, we hope for learning and therefore more cost-competitive renewable hydrogen production near 2030. Now, this is done on the one hand side by looking at policies such as the European emissions trading scheme, where we put a price on carbon, but we're also looking at the new funds which are available at the European Commission to help kind of the countries with their post-COVID recovery. And here we actually made an agreement with member states that 37% of that funding needs to go to facilitate the green energy transition. So this could indeed be the production of hydrogen, but you also could think about investments in new industrial processes such that these industries can switch from natural gas or coal to the use of hydrogen for their production processes. And then last but not least, it was also mentioned, even though this is a European hydrogen strategy, we think international cooperation is critical to upscale renewable hydrogen. Because indeed, the targets for 2030 are ambitious from a European perspective, but we know that for 2050, we have to have a multiple scale up of renewable hydrogen consumption in Europe to achieve our targets. And that can only be done through international cooperation, through indeed international certification of hydrogen, and by exchanging kind of the policy lessons, both within the EU and those from other countries like we have here around the table, because only then, of course, we can achieve those objectives.
Okay, thank you very much. And that sounds pretty comprehensive, but still ambitious, even though industry, of course, seems to suggest there's already plenty of plans in place, but realizing them will be another matter. Okay, Elvira, you think you've solved your problem? No. Wonder what that is. Okay. Can I do? It says mute for me. I'm just wondering whether I, as the moderator, can do anything about it, but it doesn't look like it. Strange. You know what? Maybe if you leave and join again, and then in the meantime, we'll move on and then come back to you. I think that might be the best option. So, okay, so we'll just move on to Felipe. So, as we just said, international cooperation is of course important, and Chile is one of the countries with whom I'm sure the EU will be cooperating, because you've made green hydrogen a pillar of your carbon neutrality goal with a very impressive target for electrolysers. You've also published the first call for electrolyser auctions. So with the policy being still at a very early stage, could you still provide us some insights regarding the design of this innovative policy? Because we've seen plenty of experience with auctions for renewables, but for electrolysers, this is new. And what capacity are you aiming to procure?
Yes, great. So thanks Ute, and I'm very pleased to be here. So as you said, my name is Felipe. I work here in Chile at the Ministry of Energy, where we're working with the New Energy Carriers group in deploying the efforts for the execution of our national green hydrogen strategy. And as you said, we've recently published a call for electrolyzer auctions. So I'd be glad to tell you a little bit more about the design of that policy. But first, perhaps let me provide some context. So to really grasp the design of that policy, it's necessary to see kind of the big picture. And I agree with Ruth in this aspect, that one should not design green hydrogen strategies in isolation. So for Chile, that has not been the case as well. In 2019, Chile became the first developing country to commit to carbon neutrality by 2050. And then it became also one of the first countries to propose a framework law on climate change, which gives legal support to all our climate goals. And later on in 2020, the country updated its nationally determined contribution, increasing its ambition in all its components. So that is basically the framework from where we started. And this process also coincides with a very historical and significant moment, given the social challenges which are arising in our country. So us as policymakers, we have a necessity to develop cost-effective, reliable, and accessible solutions for energy transition. And this should come as no surprise. In Chile, this is mainly feasible because we have large renewable potential. So there are more than 1,700 gigawatts of untapped renewable energy capacity, which is more than 70 times the current size of our power grid. And this capacity is spread throughout the country, right? So at north, we have the desert of Atacama with one of the best solar resources in the world. In the south, we have the Patagonian winds, which are also a very cost-effective way of producing cheap renewable power. And also, the country enjoys a solid regulatory framework with a liberalized power sector, where we have competitive and technologically agnostic, economically dispatched market. And all of this really provides a unique opportunity to, of course, integrate renewable power into the grid, but also to produce new energy carriers, right, such as green hydrogen, for a deep decarbonization of our energy systems. And in our estimates, in our studies, green hydrogen would play a significant role in achieving our own climate goals. So something around 21% of the required emissions reduction would come from green hydrogen. But we also believe that given this cost efficiency, we could share this renewable potential with the world. And so that was probably the main argument for us to launch our national green hydrogen strategy, where we tried to transform all of this ambition into action, right? So as you said, we defined a couple of goals. Some of them are very ambitious. For 2030, we're aiming to have 25 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity, but there's also a shorter term goal, which is by 2025, having 5 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity under construction or under development or operational in the best of cases, right? Becoming the main destination also for investments in green hydrogen in LATAM, and producing 200 kilotons per year of green hydrogen in at least 2 hydrogen valleys, right? So those are like the main goals we are setting ourselves as policymakers. And given these goals, we have thought a lot about how to achieve this and how to incentivize the development of this hydrogen economy. So we've identified 4 pillars, and one of them has to do with this call for electrolyzers. So I will go into that in a brief moment. But let me just show you like all of the actions that we're undertaking. So the main idea behind this is that, of course, only supporting the supply side will just not be enough. As Ruth said, we have to also tackle the demand side. We have also to tackle regulation and, of course, research and development. So our 4 pillars are, first of all, regulation and permits, where we've worked leveling the field and clearing out the blockades for the development of this hydrogen economy. Then there's also international partnerships and accelerating local demand, which we see as an opportunity for creating knowledge and preparing ourselves for when the costs really decline, and then we are able to scale up the production of green hydrogen. And the third pillar is local development for us, so preparing the territories and coordinating the key players. Here we also have an important infrastructure challenge. And the final pillar, perhaps the finishing touch, right, are funding and incentives. So really closing the cost gap for having early deployment of green hydrogen projects which can generate knowledge and can help us for making a better energy transition. So it's on this last dimension where this call for electrolyzers actually takes place. And this is an initiative by Corfo, which is a public institution which focuses on providing incentives for production, but also innovation in our country. And the story has sort of two parts to it. The first one is an early call, just following up on the National Green Hydrogen Strategy, where Corfo set out a call for requests for information. So the idea was to map out potential players and to really understand what was the status of the hydrogen ecosystem, where were the projects, which type of projects could we see deploying soon. And in this stage, Corfo received somewhat around 20 projects, with somewhat over $12 billion on estimated investment, which were located mainly in the Antofagasta and Atacama regions. So this is the north of Chile. And the projects were ranging from small distributed projects, right? So something as 100 tons of green hydrogen annually, which is small project, to industrial scale with over 100,000 tons of green hydrogen annually. And given this picture is where Corfo and, of course, the government as well decided to call to set out this call for auction of electrolyzers, where we are making a request for proposal now in 2021. And the idea is to provide financial support for accelerating the development of green hydrogen projects in Chile, and that's the baseline, right? So applications are open now. Applications will be open until September. And the procured capacity will ultimately depend on the results. We are very aware that this call would probably not finance a project on itself, so we're looking for co-financing, and we're estimating somewhere around 200, 400 megawatts of funded capacity. And the design, basically, we're looking to give out a not so large amount of money. It's $50 million. We acknowledge that this is not a lot, but we are aiming not to provide only funding, but also to provide a state endorsement to a given project which has undergone a proper assessment process, and to accompany it through the several stages of its development. So this kind of speaks with the different objectives of this call, where on one hand, we want to accelerate, of course, the implementation of projects, but we also want to advance in the definition of necessary regulation. We want to facilitate the creation of industrial and commercial alliances. We want to strengthen local capacity and specialized human capital, and of course, contribute to the carbon neutrality goals. So those are like the complementary objectives of this policy. And in terms of what does it finance, so it finances electrolyzers, but it can finance the balance of plant. And we're looking to give these funds to local or international companies looking to develop green hydrogen projects with a commissioning no later than December 2025, so early deployment. And the size of these projects should be no less than 10 megawatts. So in that terms, we're looking to finance like mid-sized projects, not gigascale probably, but no less than 10 megawatts. And just to comment on the final aspects of the proposal, so there are 5 criteria of assessment, which have to do with the size of the project, so nominal power of electrolyzers, the efficiency of the contribution, but also with project maturity. And here we're looking at land availability, we're looking at water availability, whether the project has entered to the environmental permitting system, and we're also looking at the experience of the applicant and project financing model. And just to close up, so this is one initiative, but also looking at other initiatives that could support the supply side and also some other at the demand side. So we've set out a couple of fast-track piloting guides for production and supply chain, one, another for the transport sector, another for the mining sector, which are intending to facilitate the process for companies to deploy early projects of green hydrogen, either production or consumption. We're also putting a couple of initiatives on R&D. So we've recently give out the Clean Technologies Institute, which is the largest R&D investment in Chile's history, and green hydrogen will be, of course, a priority. We're also looking at other tributary instruments. So we're building actually now a tributary instrument strategy for the energy transition, where we'll be looking, of course, at the European experience of feed-in tariffs and also of tax incentives for electrolyzers. And then on the demand side, we're also looking at some of the options Emanuele commented. So, for instance, looking at quotas in gas grids or providing incentives for green hydrogen transport applications to better participate in our energy efficiency law, which was published recently this year.
Okay, thank you very much for that comprehensive overview. Certainly sounds pretty impressive. Okay, unfortunately, we still haven't got Elvira back. I have no idea what's happened there. Paola, let me come to you. Enel Green Power is, of course, a well-known company for all of us working on renewables, but always saw it as focused on, delivering lots of solar, etc. But you're the head of the hydrogen business unit. So why has Enel Green Power decided to embark on this venture? And what has been the experience with developing a green hydrogen production plant?
Thank you, Yuda, for your introduction. So as you said, I'm the head of the hydrogen business unit for Enel Green Power. And as we all know, renewable generation and electrification are playing an increasingly important role to combat climate change and limit the global warming. But we ask to ourselves, what can be done when industrial processes require other form of energy? And hydrogen is an important ally of electrification in the decarbonization of certain sectors. For example, the chemical industries or other energy-hungry industries where electrification is not possible. And therefore, for Enel Green Power and more in general for the Enel Group, renewable hydrogen represents the perfect complement to electrification for our large industrial customers of the hard-to-abate sector that want to find a way to cut their carbon footprint. In fact, let's remember that in 2018, 24% of CO2 emission at global level were due to hard-to-abate sectors such as cement, steel, ceramic, and chemical industry. So in order to satisfy also this customer, 1 year ago, this hydrogen business unit was created within Enel Green Power for the development of renewable hydrogen project. In this year, we developed and we are still developing projects for the production of renewable hydrogen in various parts of the world where we are present with renewable plants under construction or under development. And the development experience show that renewable hydrogen has a great potential. There are customers that already use hydrogen, gray hydrogen. And there are different business models that we can apply depending on the customer need and the renewable source availability. But the main obstacle, as has already been mentioned by the other panelists, is that today renewable hydrogen production cost is still too expensive compared to other fossil fuel solutions. And it is expensive because of mainly capex cost, and depending on the country, also because of the electricity cost. So this is the first difficulty. Another difficulty is that a clear definition of green hydrogen is not available yet. And so developing projects sometimes can be a bit more complicated because there are different options available, and a clear definition could for sure help us in developing new projects.
Sorry, had you finished there?
Yeah.
Sorry. Wasn't clear what that had cut out. Okay, thank you. Elvira, you're back.
Can you hear me now?
Yes!
Yes.
Excellent.
Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry for that. I don't know what happened. So I'll catch up with your question regarding our work in the Coalition for Action. First of all, I'm Elvira López Prados. I'm the head of the CEO office at Acciona Energía. Acciona Energía is the leading pure renewable utility with more than 11 gigawatts under operation in 16 countries in onshore wind, solar PV, hydro, CSP, biomass, and storage. So as industry, we participated in this white paper that draws from on the ground experiences to provide insights on green hydrogen opportunities and what is needed from policymakers to accelerate its adoption. So what we were seeing is that more and more countries launch comprehensive hydrogen strategies, as Emanuele said. And while this is an encouraging development, the coalition believes that a strategy is needed to do more and to bring real regulation to address several areas. Firstly, electrolyser targets must be backed with sufficient R&D funding and other forms of financial support. The second point that the paper brought out was that green hydrogen demand and uptake must be enabled at all scales because some strategies focus mainly only on building supply through large-scale green hydrogen projects. And thirdly, those strategies must include plans for scaling up renewable capacity and building out associated power infrastructure. And lastly, as Emanuele also said, certification will be central to creating market. Strategies must put forward supportive enabling frameworks to encourage the development of these robust certification schemes. In fact, one of the main barriers identified was to enable market entry and stimulate demand, as Ruth also said. In this sense, the coalition urged governments to develop national strategies and leverage post-COVID stimulus to kickstart production in order to be available for demand. Second, stimulate demand through carbon pricing and other measures such as green product mandates, public procurement, and sectoral targets, and facilitate both central projects and integrated green hydrogen hubs or valleys, collocating production and consumption. This was in a nutshell. And focusing on the barriers, I can talk more from the real experience of our project in Mallorca that we are currently developing in alliance with Enagas and other companies. It's a project that generates green hydrogen from photovoltaic energy in the island of Mallorca. The project is currently under construction and will serve a series of energy applications in the island, heat and energy for public, industry and commercial buildings, public buses, auxiliary power to ferries in the port, producing more than 300 tons of hydrogen per year. It was the first green hydrogen project in the Mediterranean country to get European funding, and the biggest hurdles and learnings in the process were that as there is not a specific regulation for green hydrogen, the design, permitting, construction process is requiring an ad hoc treatment with local authorities and case-by-case negotiation. And this is not an optimal or agile scenario for future scale-up projects. In fact, for example, in Spain, green hydrogen is regulated as a hydrocarbon. So the process is much more slow, and the land on which these infrastructures are to be developed must be classified as industrial use. So it limits a lot the development phase. And there is no differentiation in the procedure depending on the size of the project. So at the end, there are multiple barriers, that there is a lack of single window to facilitate the paperwork, etc. So we have learned that the real deadlines required for the design and construction process, and that we are applying that in our future projects and the expectations from our customers.
Okay, thank you. Now, just to follow up with both you, Elvira and Paula, I mean, we have two policymakers here. They've told us what they're currently doing, what their plans are. From what you've heard, do you think that's enough? Or from the perspective of your company, what are the one or two things you really desperately want them to move on right now?
Okay, so I start. So as I said, one of the barrier is that renewable hydrogen is, let's say, expensive. And to be competitive, it should be developed at scale in the next 10 years, allowing electrolyzer cost to decrease thanks to learning rates and economic of scale. So it's fundamental to define targets, design support scheme, and allocate funding to reach these goals. CapEx decrease, electrolyzer costs decrease, and separate, limit, or even avoid general support to low carbon hydrogen that can delay reaching the scale up of electrolyzer industry. So this is one of the main things that we would like to ask. Then, of course, stimulate the innovation, because in order to decrease the cost of the electrolyzer, we need innovation. And on the demand side, eventually include quotas, mandates, but limited to industrial use of hydrogen, or to the use of hydrogen that cannot be better decarbonized with electrification. So to use hydrogen in the best ways possible, in the most efficient way. Then the other point I would ask is, of course, a simpler and faster permitting procedure for renewable generation and for hydrogen production projects. This is required because long and complex permitting procedure hamper the RES deployment, which is needed to serve RES demand for hydrogen. So simplification measures enable first renewables to fulfill electrification targets, and combined with simple permitting procedure along the green hydrogen value chain are precondition for renewable hydrogen development. Then the third thing I would ask, if I can, is of course taxes and levies should be fairly set across energy carriers and be in line with their contribution to decarbonization. Energy consumer, for example, should be relieved from bearing the cost of renewable development and decarbonization. And those costs maybe should be transferred to general state budget. And then to conclude, of course, we need a clear definition of renewable hydrogen that is expected soon, at least in Europe, in order to take decision on our projects.
Okay, thank you. And Rid and Felipe, I think you've probably been taking notes there. Just on one, I don't know whether everyone's noticed there is quite an active chat going on as well. And I mean, I saw one of the points was on this issue about, you know, where should we use green hydrogen? I mean, from Irina's perspective, we of course also agree. I mean, you know, where you can electrify, that's just a much more efficient way of doing things. I mean, you know, running your average car on hydrogen probably doesn't make sense, and certainly for most heating of buildings, you know, where you can use heat pumps and also biomass to some extent in district heating, that's not where it should go. So that point, hopefully most people will agree with. Elvira, do you have something to add on what you want from policymakers now?
Well, I've already gone into it because, you know, the coalition for action paper had that goal and to provide those key recommendations. At the end is agility, to be able to deploy at the scale and at the, you know, rapidity necessary, because there is still a lack of common agreements on standards, on the paper of hydrogen in regulation, as it's not a hydrocarbon. So it's important there's so much regulatory work to do that at the end there are a lot of dark places in regulation that can stop projects from moving forward. And for example, we are first movers, and we try to be pioneers in adapting the existing regulation. And for example, we had to implement a system of guarantees of origin by blockchain, since the guarantee of origin of the green hydrogen is not yet regulated. So at the end, it's about bringing costs down. It's about fostering green hydrogen and beyond other types of hydrogen, which won't. I mean, for example, blue hydrogen. From our opinion, we are 100% renewable since inception, and our vision is green hydrogen. There are voices that defend blue hydrogen, that will be necessary, etc. But this is quite, you know, tricky, as there is a huge risk of diverting attention from electrification, which is more efficient. And blue hydrogen at the end is a way to keep consuming fossil fuels, relying in not commercially available CCS versus electrolysers that already show a much clearer pathway in the learning curve. So it's about focusing, it's about bringing the regulation that the sector needs. And regarding the chicken and egg paradox that Emanuele also commented, it's quite, at the end, if you promote production, like happened in our project in Mallorca, and like we are trying to do with other projects that we have in the pipeline, once you bring production, the demand starts coming. At the end, it's a way of breaking that chicken and egg, and if production, there is R&D funding for that production, clients are already in the mood and with the right measures, and you know, everyone wants to decarbonize because that's the future and that's where we have to go. So demand, little by little, it's coming to those projects. So at the end, it's about agility and sufficient funding.
Okay, thanks. Felipe, did you have any responses to any of that?
Yeah, of course. So thank you, Paula and Elvira, for the requests. I tried to take note of them all. I hope to hit them all. Probably I'll miss someone, but if there's something I can comment on. So, of course, in innovation, we're working on this Clean Technology Institute. I think we have initiatives in all the aspects mentioned. I think we fairly agree with the view from the private sector. We, of course, agree that agility is one of the main tasks and challenges, and of course, regulation, which is the first pillar for our work at the government. So just to touch on the points which were raised. So on innovation, there's the Clean Technology Institute. We're trying to spend a large amount of money in really identifying the best paths forward for developing the industry and for deploying future policies. In terms of quotas, we're also looking at several international experiences. Perhaps here we are not looking specifically at quotas of hydrogen, but at quotas of perhaps clean energy, as the regulation in Europe, RED II, applies. And also in simpler and faster permitting procedure, we're also working with the environmental permitting system here in Chile, which kind of centralizes this process for green hydrogen projects and also for renewable power projects, which have also seen a massive boom in Chile over the last couple of years. And there is a challenge of volume associated with that development. So there's a lot of projects and initiatives going on to create a more agile process, not only for, as I said, green hydrogen projects, but also power plants, renewable and transmission capacity. And in terms of the clear definition and the guarantee of origin, that of course is a very interesting challenge for us. And then again, it does not only limit itself to green hydrogen. We've had many cases in industry, but also in mining sector, where the companies want to certify the origin of their, in this case, renewable electricity. In the future, it will be renewable hydrogen. And so our ISO is currently working on a platform which certifies the renewable energy which goes into a certain consumption. So at least from our perspective, we believe that all of these challenges are currently being addressed. And of course, we're trying to do it as fast as possible. We understand that there is not much of a time window to scale up these projects, and we need to be effective. And in that sense, for us, the participation of the private sector in this type of discussions and sharing their views with us, participating in our processes and in the elaboration of these strategies on green hydrogen, but also on tributary instruments and also on flexibility for the power sector, for instance, has been very appreciated. So we're very thankful for this instance as well.
Thank you, Felipe. Ruud, anything you would like to add?
Yes, so on the 14th of July, we will putting forward what is called Fit for 55 package. So it refers to our new 55% greenhouse gas emission target for 2030. And there, I hope that many of the boxes which you just mentioned will be ticked in terms of the policy framework for hydrogen. There will be a second part of the package at the end of the year, so in December. So combined, we think that will provide the regulatory framework for hydrogen. But I also wanted to quickly pick up on 2 points which I think are important and come out of this discussion. First of all, I think it's important not to make a direct relationship between renewable electricity in, say, 2009 and electrolyzers now. And the reason I'm saying that is that, of course, the competitiveness of the renewable hydrogen production highly depends on the competitiveness of renewable power generation. And here, of course, we already made big strides. So I think it's really important, and that we also see in the projects, to continue to kind of push for competition, innovation in the production of renewable hydrogen, because it's a combination of renewable power generations, where indeed the industries which are here on the round the table have done tremendous jobs, and then combining that indeed with the electrolyzers and finding the right solutions. So that, I think, is also critically important. And then the second element, which I absolutely agree with as well, which is the permitting process, which of course is very important. But at the same time, it is also important to have permitting processes, of course, because we want to make sure that also when we're producing the renewable hydrogen, that it is a product which reduces CO2 emissions, that really contributes to climate neutrality, and also, of course, has the acceptance of the public. So from that perspective, I think that is very important. And then last but not least, I think one of the elements which we should also rely upon, and we should rely upon, is indeed the digitalization of our energy system. And here indeed the blockchain technology, which Elvira mentioned, for example, are some of those technologies and solutions which are out there, which I think can also enable us to develop the policy frameworks, which are indeed agile. Because of course, with more information and with more granular information about where hydrogen is produced, where it's consumed, we can also kind of help manage the introduction and transition towards this decarbonized energy system.
Thank you, Ruud. And in fact, that brings us to the end of this session. It's exactly, 7 o'clock our time, 5 o'clock Vienna time. We actually had loads more questions, but I think we covered so much ground. And we had quite a lot of engagement from the audience. I know it's always difficult when it's in the chat. I know some of panelists answered some questions. We're taking note of a few other things. We could have a much longer discussion, and maybe sometime soon we will meet in the real world to discuss these issues further. I would like to thank our panelists. It's been great and engaging, and I think it's been brilliant to have, policymakers from 2 different parts of the world, and then two of the industry leaders, and we will continue the discussion, no doubt. And thank you, Emanuele, as well for your scene setting. So, bye everyone from